Hello, everyone. Welcome to the keynote at the Privacy and Security Forum, Spring 2021. I'm Paul Schwartz, and I'm a co-organizer of this event. It's my great pleasure today to be having a discussion with Professor Ulrich Kelber, the Federal Commissioner for Data Protection and Freedom of Information of Germany. Professor Kelber has a really interesting, fascinating background for someone who is a data protection commissioner. He studied computer science and biology in Bonn, which we can see behind you on your screen. And then you worked as a research associate in IT and a knowledge management consultant for 6 years in an IT company. You then switched and became part of the political realm and served as a member of the German Bundestag, the Congress, for 18 years. And then became a parliamentary state secretary for the Federal Minister for Justice and Consumer Protection. Since January 2019, you've been Federal Commissioner for Data Protection. I can think of no commissioner in the world who's had such a varied and valuable background before taking office. Also, the timing is great, Professor Kelber. Happy third birthday of the GDPR coming into effect.
Thank you, Paul. I'm glad to be with you.
And so let me start, to prepare for our discussion. And what I want to do in a second is just talk about COVID and the pandemic in Germany and data protection issues. But to get ready for our talk, I had the great pleasure of reading your official report of activities. The most recent one is from 2020. And I was so happy to see all the great graphics and the fun cartoons. And so at the end of it, there was a chart comparing your office to Batman and pointing out that both you and Batman are unable to force the legislator to affect your suggestions.
That was a kind of success story in the end at the social networks, just to explain people what is the role of the Data Protection Commissioner, because somehow some politicians, some journalists, even some activists told, why did you prove that solution or that? And I have to tell them, I'm not a proving kind of testifying, but I counsel politics. I'm informing the society, and I'm just testing if someone is going with the law, with the Euro data protection law or not. But I'm not a testing laboratory of bringing in things into the market. And these memes were a nice gesture just to explain what the role of a data protection commissioner is like.
Yeah, the memes were great, and they included Indiana Jones, Harry Potter, Breaking Bad, and Santa Claus. And so that was great. And I have to say also, looking at the report of activities, I really marveled at the many, many policy areas of privacy law, international, European, and Germany, in which your office has played such a vital and important part.
We are the largest economy in Europe, so even all the branches of the economy has important companies in Germany, and with more than 80 million inhabitants and a number of complaints to German companies or not German companies, international companies with their European headquarters in different European countries came to Germany. So we have to involve ourselves in the number of cases and a number of political fields.
Great. So let's talk now about COVID. And what's been interesting in looking at the landscape in Germany, among the kind of many facets of the legal landscape during the pandemic, is that there's actually a Corona Warn app, CWA. You mentioned in your most recent report that at the time of the publication, it had been downloaded 25 million times. You were very involved in the development of the app. and you ultimately praise it as being a quote unquote excellent product. So here, I think is something that potentially the rest of the world and certainly America can learn from Germany. In America, the Biden administration does not want to touch the issue of a Corona Warn app. It seems that we're going to proceed in a very diffuse way. Just yesterday, United Airlines announced that if their customers uploaded full vaccination information to their loyalty program, they could win a raffle. So unclear, what data protection is going to be provided there. And so very kind of diffuse situation in the United States, non-centralized. So in Germany with this Corona Warn app, what measures were taken to ensure that the application would protect user privacy?
So there is no technology really meant to measure if people have been close to each other for being endangered by an infection in such a pandemic situation. So the choose for Bluetooth as a technology for measuring how close people came to each other was the decision for the least inefficient technology, because at the beginning they were asking for using the cell phone data for that, but even inside of cities, they are too less accurate to really measure if people came close to each other. Is there a wall between them? In which floor of a building they have been? Was there glass, anything between such people in a bus or in a train situation? So that wouldn't solve the problem. Even you could collect that data in a centralized way and maybe identify people really tracking their situation. So the decision was made for that kind of contact tracing, giving people the ability to warn others about the situation they have been in, even they don't remember being in that situation. Both sides not remembering being in that situation when they are asked by officials. So where have you been? Whom did you met? And that is pretty fine, but those people which stand behind you in a line or things you don't know couldn't be warned. We have some numbers now from evaluation that shows that in every single warning by the app, that more than 80% of those who have been warned took a testing, and out of those, 7% were tested positive. So 7% doesn't sound much over that period, but the average positive testing was 1%, so 7 times higher. And so the 93% wrong negatives, wrong positives, wasn't that problem. So in reality, it's a tool which is working fine on the efficiency side and which is privacy friendly because all the data are just stored in a decentralized way. And the interconnection is just about Bluetooth IDs, randomly changed Bluetooth IDs broadcasted, even with some artificially wrong Bluetooth IDs to hide, to camouflage all these stuff. And then you're identifying on your phone locally if you have been affected and you have to go to a testing. So privacy friendly and efficient, but the problem was first, it's was handled as the only tool in the beginning. So the holy tool is coming to solve the problem for us all. No, it's just one tool between a lot of numbers like functioning public health authorities and things like that. And now in the end, there is the new holy tool. We have to collect centralized, personalized contact tracking informations. So it's like repeating the problem. But yes, in the end, we will see that that was one tool which were developed in the right direction. And the problem was that it wasn't developed with updates and upgrades in the first month. Now the upgrades are coming for manual check-in, for diary, a contact diary, now for a manual checking in at events. The next step should be to install a kind of automatic cluster detection. We presented that ideas to Apple and Google because we think that can be done privacy friendly too, without the global collection of that data, but local information for very fast alerts and being efficient with the resources of the public health authorities.
So as a follow-up question, so the app, it was primarily initially to recognize outbreaks of COVID, right? To recognize clusters. So will this technology or different technology be used now to track parties who've been vaccinated? And is there any plans for things like vaccination passports in Germany? Very controversial topic.
Yeah, not that technology. There are plans to insert the certificate of being vaccinated in the Corona tracing app, just to push the use of the app. But the digital green certificate of the European Union gives some framework for all the member states of how they can introduce such certificates, which is decided on the national level, but the interoperability for all the crossing of the borders, this is decided on the European level. And one thing is, there is a decentralized situation. So in the best way, such an app or the Corona Alert app, you have a digital certificate on your cell phone, and no one is collecting where you are, where have you checked in with that certificate, but you show the certificate to the man at the door, and he is scanning your certificate with your name and your birthday on it, and a QR code, and and which is brought back as, yes, that is a certificate which is tested, and the certificate, the QR code is from Ulrich Kelber, born March 1968. And then you can compare these two things. But the one at the door doesn't see anything more than this is a right certificate and that is the right person. He doesn't see where did you vaccinated, where do you live, which medicament did you get, and things like that. That is all hidden. So the digital solution is even better than using papers. Yeah, where much more information is written on.
Because it's authenticated too.
Authenticated, and it's data minimization, which is a part of the General Data Protection Regulation. You just need those both dates, name and date of birth. That's enough for authentication, and everything done is in the background, privacy friendly.
That sounds terrific.
That's the idea behind it.
So you mentioned the GDPR. Let's shift now on the GDPR's birthday to talk about it. And so in an interview, you've stated that one main deficit you see with the GDPR concerns the enforcement of data protection vis-a-vis major international IT companies. And I wonder if you could elaborate on this critique and how you would suggest improving enforcement.
Yeah, thanks. So we introduced in the General Data Protection Regulation for having a harmonized data protection regulation through whole Europe, not just the European Union, but even the states of the European Economic Area, the one-stop shop system. The idea behind that was one face to the customer and one face to the companies. So you don't have to deal with 27 or 28 with the British and 33 with Iceland and Norway and things like that countries, but with one. So as a citizen, you can go to your national data protection authority. As a company, the data protection authority of your headquarters is the one you have to deal with. That was the pretty clever idea behind that. What we see is that that means that even, for example, smaller countries, which give headquarters to a number of international companies, don't have the resources, don't have the framework for dealing with that large amount of complaints from European citizens. And so even the complex procedure of solving different opinions on the outcome of such a cross-border case. We call it the adherence procedure, isn't started, because for that you need a draft decision on the case from the leading supervisory authority. And if the concerned supervisory authorities, for example, the national authority from the country that complaint was started, is not in line with the draft decision of the lead supervisory authority, then this comes to the European Data Protection Board and is decided by majority. So that was the idea behind that. And we see that's too slow these days, and a number of very important cross-border cases isn't solved for more than 3 years now, 3 years in one day. So my suggestion were, let's introduce a kind of an agency which works for the European Data Protection Board. The European Data Protection Board is built by the national commissioners of all member states. And if they decide to give an important cross-border case to that agency by a 3/4 majority, for example, then this agency handle those complaints with a European procedural law system behind it, very efficiently, very quickly, to decide that cases which are the base for decisions in a number of other cases. So that's my proposal for an update for the General Data Protection Regulation.
So and it's a fascinating proposal. So what you've just set out is that there be a more unified, singular entity at the EU level that then over time would create a more uniform interpretation of the GDPR and related data laws. And so, and I think you've just explained why that would be more beneficial. So would that then require that we go through kind of the legislative process again and the whole comitology, and then we come up with, I guess, a amendment to the GDPR?
Two answers. First one, I don't know if there is even a majority for that in the board, because the commissioners see that they are doing everyday work on harmonization, and there is success in many areas of that work. So even if a national authority wants to testify positively code of conduct of a large company, they have to go with that code of conduct through the board. So a number of other authorities are working on that too. And in the end, it's a decision of the European board. So that's harmonization successfully done every day with a lot of experts working on that. And so they see some things are really doing well. And with such a new entity, such a new agency, they can lose some parts of their independency. That's the one side of the medal. The second one is that a number of lawmakers in the European Parliament, people from the data protection authorities, and even some of the civil society do not want to touch the GDPR because they fear that in the moment you open the debate about updates of the GDPR, all the lobbyists are coming out of the bushes and asking for put the level of data protection down because it's a hurdle for economic success, it's a hurdle for scientific researchers, and it's not building a level playing field. So they fear you will not get an update, but a downgrade of the GDPR if you open that. My opinion is it's not good to commit suicide because you're afraid of the death.
Okay. And, you know, there's similar debate in California about the California Medical Information Act, CMIA, which is completely unharmonized in many aspects with HIPAA, our federal law, but nobody wants to open it up again. The pro-privacy people feel it would get weaker, and industries are afraid it would get a lot stricter. So there we have it. So as a follow-up question, there was an interesting article recently in Politico that points to critics of the privacy system in the EU who fault that some DPAs lean towards so-called engagement, which is a euphemism, I guess, for supplying compliance advice to companies over investigations and enforcements. And so do you agree with this critique regarding whether there's been too much compliance advice and not enough investigation and enforcement?
I don't have the whole picture for every single authority in Europe. So just concentrating on the German situation, which is what not all people watching now knew. We don't have one national commissioner, but we have additional commissioner on the Bundesländer level for United States, the states level. So we are divided in our authority. And we have both of it on our agenda. The one is advising, helping to even avoid privacy breaks. And the other one is to enforce the law. And at the national level, there is a lot of enforcement going on, even fines which were brought out. So the lag is on the cross-border cases, not on the different national levels. But yes, I think most of the European data protection authorities are underfinanced and has too less resources to fulfill both tasks, even maybe too less personnel for fulfilling one of those tasks. So it's would be wise to invest in guarantee citizens' rights, so enforcing. And it would be a clever idea for giving European companies a level playing field with their non-European competitors in giving more resources for that kind of advising companies if they have questions of how to fulfill the GDPR, because there are not only large companies, there are small companies of 3 or 5 people working in it, and they don't have experts on data protection. They have experts on their business model.
So that's kind of interesting, because that also feeds into your call for reducing, if possible, bureaucracy for small and medium-sized enterprises. So you've like to see a reduction in information and documentation requirements for these smaller companies. And I wonder, what do you have in mind specifically in terms of reducing the bureaucracy that data protection often brings with it?
I want to help small companies, clubs or civil society organizations, and even want to raise the understanding of people of paper and information they see. So my proposal is to reduce the informations you have to give to your customers or to your members in an organization on data processing, which they expect to happen. So if you call someone and the answering machine is the English idiom for that, give the
Voicemail.
one. Yeah, sorry.
I think it's voicemail. I don't think
The voicemail is goes online. Then you expect that your message is recorded and that the telephone number you transmit is recorded. If you go give someone your business card, you expect him to take that contact addresses to contact you. And if you're going to a building with cameras outside, then it would be enough to have a camera sign. This camera is made by the German Federal Commissioner for Data Protection. More information, and then a link. That would be enough instead of pages and pages and pages. And the second thing is of giving a kind of a cascade of information. That means you give the 5 most important informations, and if someone is interested, he can go deeper, but he's not confronted with 50 pages of data protection information.
Yeah, so this kind of raises the whole issue of consent. And, you know, in the, there's a subfield of comedy that is GDPR humor. It's a little subfield, but there's actually a t-shirt that I once saw where it said, do you know a GDPR expert, ? And then the answer was yes, but I can't tell you his name.
Yeah.
So the notion is really that somehow the GDPR and data protection law stops societal communication, even though, as you're suggesting, consent is inherent. So one of the most complex topics in data protection is indeed consent and how you obtain it and how far it reaches. So Professor Kelber, what are your views regarding consent, and in particular, things like the granting of consent to cookies?
So giving consent is the start of everything, but not the end of everything. So sometimes people sees like consent is the only legal base for data processing. It's not. There are 5 more legal bases, and in my everyday life as a private person, I'm confronted with situations where they ask for my consent and I'm asking them back, for what? So if I'm a member of your organization, you are ordered by law to invite me once a year for assembly of all members. So you have to process my contact information. You don't need my consent on that. And if I go to a doctor, he has to send me a bill. So he has to process that data for billing me for the treatment. He doesn't need my consent on that. So that's the one side of a wrong understanding of consent. The other side of a wrong understanding is that you really think you can make people consent in everything. And I say, no, it has to be informed, concrete, and voluntarily. Consent, that's it's forgotten too sometimes. And the other thing is that like cookie banners, people are coming to me and say, please, you data protectioners, stop that cookie banner. It's just for privacy. I say, right, it's for privacy because without the cookie banner, they will process your data without knowing that they are even processing your data. You cannot choose at that situation. You don't know who owns your data at that moment or has your data, not owning. Oh, no, not owning, has your data at that moment. So the only ability to get rid of the cookie banners is to not track people. So why did I have to, if I go to a media website, 140 trackers and cookies? That's ridiculous. But sometimes even people just clicking on some tools for creating a website doesn't know that they are really inventing trackers. So the landing page of the German government when you first roam into the German cell network and we are informing people, oh, there is COVID, so you get informations on what the rules are under XYZ. The first landing page were with cookies. So the first thing was not information about COVID-19, but a cookie banner. So I asked him, why do you need cookies on a simple web page just telling people, so if you need information, you have to do that and this and that. And it was just by clicking around with the tool, and it was spying on people, nothing else than spying on people, and we don't need that. So that's a fight. And I don't know if we win that fight or we'll lose it in the public opinion.
So it sounds like the problem is that you're pointing to is there's too much consent on one hand, and too little data minimalization, and that where consent should really be used and be meaningful, it sounds like it's getting drowned out because there's all this kind of trivial instances where where you're agreeing to everything. And so less consent, more data minimization, and better consent.
Absolutely. To bring back consent for what is meant, that means for things we're really consenting in a data processing to get a job done, which is not meant by law, which is not legitimate interest to have the both major other decisions. And to go back to data minimization, which is the idea, some people say, no, we are in the age of artificial intelligence, you need bulks of data to train these algorithms. That's true. But you need those data which are allowed to process. That can be on consent or on scientific research by a law which makes pseudonymized data of everyone which is have been in a treatment available for those training, yes, but you can't collect data just creating a data lake and then give people the ability to cut in that data lake with the algorithms and really think that you control if they did something wrong with the results of that processing. Because at that point of the process, you cannot really see if the collection was done right. Is this person allowed to have that data? Is there any result of the processing shared with a third party and maybe have a negative impact on the data subject, so the citizen, some days, weeks, months, or years from now. So the only chance to really control is at the beginning to say, you must not process personalized data if you not have a legal base to do that, and your purpose for what you collect that data cannot be changed without a legal base too. That's the only chance to really control that.
Thank you. You know, you've mentioned artificial intelligence, and that is one of the most controversial contemporary topics in data protection, AI. To go back again to your most recent report of activities, you discuss AI in some detail and you find not only risks from it, but note as well its potential and take a positive view of it to some degree. You write, AI can be both data protection compliant and oriented towards the common good. What you do then is you say, due to the potentially large effects of AI systems on all areas of life, there's a need for, quote, clear guidelines and regulations. So let me ask you what your assessment is of EU-wide developments and German developments regarding the regulation of AI.
We have that white book on AI in the European Union as a proposal of the European Commission. I was glad that they accepted in some different manner an idea which we adopted in before. We were not the creators of that idea in the Data Ethics Commission of the German government. I was a member of that commission, which worked in the year 2019 up to the early, now it stopped in 2019. So, and we said we need a kind of a risk pyramid for algorithmic systems. We call that algorithmic system because the most things which are now declared as AI are not AI, but algorithmic systems, to have that collective idiom for that. And the idea is that 99.99999% of all the algorithms are just meant for the free market of ideas, implemented, invented without any disturbance by any authority, but they may go after you by investigating if there are complaints or any hints that something went wrong. And that is meant for all the algorithms which are typically like, you try to highlight a text in a 2-column paper on your things, and the AI system is understanding where the end of the column is and the starting of the second column. It's a typical algorithmic system. So there is no risk seen by that. And then you have additional steps, which can mean some harm to the data subjects or citizens. And the fifth and highest thing is that the risk can't be bared. So there is being a way to forbid that kind of algorithmic systems. An idea was autonomous weapon systems. The fourth step were high-speed bidding systems in the finance market. So first you have to come to show how you develop that system, and then you may bring it into the market. And lower steps are, for example, you have to show the quality of your training data. There has to be a standardized development process and things like that. That was one of the ideas where we can really took an anchor as supervisory authorities to go into these proving, investigating, and enforcement of that ideas. And in the end, I think even classical AI can be made privacy friendly if you look out for some things. But there are different ideas like decentralized learning, federalized learning, which are privacy friendly by design. So you don't transfer data, but you transfer software. This software can learn on data without taking the data with them. So the data is maybe protected, for example, protected in a ethical proofed research center, and you send your algorithms to work on that chosen data, and then you get back an algorithm without any bias, without transferring personalized data to third parties, and you can work with that algorithms. That's the idea of this decentralized learning. And the federal learning is you have AI on your cell phone. It works on very personal data, for example, health data, and gives you hints, you react, and the things this system learns, for example, wrong positives, or false positives, sorry for the, or false negatives, it can share that, that experience with the other federal distributed algorithms. So there's still a learning process online and in real time, but without sharing personalized data. So that's the future of AI from my side.
Thank you. And I encourage our audience to send in questions, and we already have some questions. So folks, you can type that in the chat function. First question is, this is something that you mentioned already, supporting small and medium businesses. So in light of the Schrems II decision, upcoming AI regulation, which we were just discussing, e-privacy regulation, and so many other developments, how can authorities support small and medium businesses to ensure they are not disadvantaged in comparison to big corporations? And as you've mentioned, Professor Kelber, small and medium businesses, of course, have significantly fewer compliance and privacy resources to deal with all these changes.
The authorities, which are not lawmakers, can do two things. The first is enforcing the law for the larger companies to have a level playing field on the rules. And the second one is having the resources to advise if these companies, without an expert in their own staff, comes to the authority and asks, so we are planning to do this or that. Do we have to look out for something for the idea that you not will come in 2 years and fine us? Or is there anything wrong on our idea? You have to have that resources. Then you can help these companies in an early stage of their business model development. And yes, I think there is too few resources invested in the European member states for this part of the work of the supervisory authorities.
Okay, another question. Are you in favor of certifications as a means to bring standards and efficiency to privacy compliance? Pointing to, I guess it's GDPR Article 43, but are lacking real options currently under it.
Yes, but we are doing quite good in the preparation of that processes. So I think we will see the first certificates in 2021. And this will not only help the market for a differentiation between GDPR compliant solutions and services and non-compliant solutions and services, but will help developers to concentrate on their own business, because if they choose certificated GDPR compliant services and solutions and just bring on top their own ideas, and then they only have to look out to do their own stuff GDPR compliant. And that will make much more simple for them. And it will make it much more simple for the authorities to control, because if they know this is GDPR compliant and this is GDPR compliant and this is GDPR compliant, I just has to look out for how do you use that services. And so there's a much smaller scope, of things you have to look at the authority. So yes, certificate is a very important tool, even much more important than some of the tools we already use.
Thank you. Another question that's come in. This regards the alignment of regulatory fees across Europe by data subject volume. So the question is, would it not be more straightforward to align regulatory fees across Europe by data subject volume in order to ensure that small countries have the funding necessary to supervise big tech?
Yes, we do have the obligation to have a harmonized system of fees. So for the same mistakes, the same fee in every country. And we are working toward that situation, but we have to bring together now 32 countries with their different cultures on such fees. For example, my country didn't know of penalizing, fining companies, but only individuals. And so there is a trade-off between the national law in Germany and the European law. And we have some decision of courts saying, no, the European law first. And we have some decisions of saying, no, there is no, you can do that, but you have to find individuals which are responsible for the privacy breaks, for example. So that's the one side. And yes, it would make it much more simple for the smaller and less rich countries in Europe to finance their authorities if they have larger income by fees and fining. But I don't think at the end that the really money is the question of having the resources on the data protection authority. So take Ireland, which is one of the smaller countries and has now, I think, around 10 million euros of budget. And they are in court with the European Union to do not take 10 billion euro of taxes from Apple. So the European Union asked Ireland to take 10 billion euros of taxes, and they say, no, we don't want to have that. So it's 1,000 years the financing of the Data Protection Authority of Ireland.
You know, now, as we would say in the United States, that you've opened the door, as it were. Is there anything, other comments that you wish to make? You've been publicly at least a little vocal about the Irish data protection enforcement situation. And I wonder if you want to speak to that.
We have been on struggle on that a number of times now. And yes, I don't agree with the situation that some of the complaints we've sent to Ireland as a concerned supervised authority in 2018 are not even handled. We didn't get real information about the status of that process. Even in the GDPR, there is the sentence that you have to share information immediately at that point. Every time I mention that the situation in Ireland and even Luxembourg can't stand like the status quo is, I do annotate that it's not a Irish and Luxembourgish problem in the construction of the European Union alone, but if you remember the Dieselgate, then the responsible authorities in Germany weren't really enforcing the European law either. So it's not against one country, it's not against the commissioner of one authority, but I take one example. The citizen from Germany, which complained on one company with the headquarters in Ireland, gave the complaint to us. We sent that to Ireland. We asked for the status every 3 months. And then after more than 2 years, a letter from Ireland came to the person directly, not through us, which is meant to be, and asked him, so on the 3rd page, which checkbox did you check? And he didn't answer that letter. And so the Irish Commission decided that they can stop handling that complaint because there is a settlement of the complaint. So that's ridiculous.
Okay. So next question would be, and thank you for sharing that. Any thoughts on the European Code of Conduct implementation recommendations in general that you can provide from a privacy perspective? And we live in the age of the cloud, of course, with so much information now being stored remotely. So what are the privacy implications?
So Code of Conduct is a nice idea to bring responsible companies to a point where they really develop a way of compliance to the GDPR, and to give their members of their group really advises how to be compliant with GDPR, and help the authorities of on what points they have to look out if they are controlling or investigating. There are several code of conducts now went through the European Data Protection Board, most of them code of conduct by one company. but now we have the first code of conduct by cloud services vendors, showing that code of conduct. And it was a Belgian company which were founded by a German economic association. And they presented that code of conduct for clouds. And I really think that that can fly with the decision on that, positive decision on that code of conduct last week.
Excellent. That's good news. We have also kind of a comment about cookie banners and consents, building, I think, on what you said before, Professor Kelber, which is that the problem is that they're training people to consent without thinking. In other words, they're desensitizing us. And this is something we see in the US where we're kind of drowning in notice and consent. My favorite example of kind of meaningless information is at International House in Berkeley, there's a little sign before you go in that informs you that the building is in an earthquake zone. And every time I see that, I think, well, what am I supposed to do with this information exactly? Because even if I don't go into that building, I'm probably going to go into other buildings. And I'm in California, which is an earthquake zone, which I sort of kind of knew. So there's nothing operationally that that information does. So similarly, and I think you were pointing to this, is there a way that we can have less consent, but better consent?
So there are three fronts we are fighting with that. The first one is to don't let the companies come away with dark patterns. So yes, I want to have all cookies, and then options, and 4 pages later, you can then you can choose from some checkboxes. And if you choose, then they accept all cookies. All cookies or just the cookies I've checked in? So that's our dark patterns. So fighting for really having 3 even-sized buttons: accept all, deny all, and options. And deny all means deny all except session cookies, which are technologically necessary. Like, for example, my website, where you don't have a cookie banner. We really use cookies, but only these cookies which are needed technologically and which are deleted in the moment the session is ending. So nothing left on your computer. That's the first one. The second one is to hinder the European Commissions to give up the data protection level they brought in with the GDPR, with the EU privacy regulation. So we have really to tell people, you may not spy on people unless you have their consent. And if you have their consent, you may only spy or collect data for those data which are needed. And the third one is we need technological solutions for that. So I want to have my digital assistant. And I tell this digital assistant which cookies I accept, generally, or on some web pages, and he is doing all the service in the background. So if there's a new website and they have to be ordered by law to accept that, and he tells them, no, this guy does not want to have any cookie, then they have to accept that and don't present a cookie banner, but just letting me smoothly surfing the web. So that's the third front we need, because these cookie banners are out for undermining the trust of people in the data protection regulation.
Yeah, and desensitizing us all. Another question is about the Bundeskartellamt, which said today that it would examine whether Google Alphabet makes the use of services conditional on the users agreeing to the processing of their data without giving them sufficient choice as to whether, how, and for what purpose such data are processed. And so So that's really fascinating, kind of the intersection between antitrust and data protection. And also the question is, do you think this is the right approach in light of the one-stop shop mechanism?
Yes, I think that's a pretty good work the guys from the Bundeskartellamt are doing quite now with the Google investigation and with the case on Facebook. You will find these guys around here, where my fingertips on. They are now in the former presidential office in Bonn, when they moved to Berlin with the president. We are in close contact on that cases. The good thing is that the antitrust authorities don't have the same limitation like we have in the one-stop shop, but they can really act if they see something necessary. They have to be in contact with the European level of the antitrust, because the Commission has a European level antitrust. That's another difference to the data protection part, but they can act and they really have sharp teeth for that. And I think this interacting of antitrust and data protection authorities is necessary really to control the large tech companies, which gain so much power in the pandemic situation, because they have the financial resources, they have the tools for that time, and so they gain a lot of power. And I'm very honored that Professor Mund, the head of the antitrust authorities, accepted to be part of the reference panel of the General Privacy Assembly, which we introduced last month.
Thank you. Terrific. Final question. I think we have time for just one more. I wanted to ask you about facial recognition, which is something you also discuss in your 2020 report of activities. So very controversial area. You criticize in your report of activities the processing of facial recognition information if collected from an EU member state, and then it winds up getting processed because it's a non-EU facial recognition company. It winds up getting processed then and transferred to a non-EU member state, such as the US. So in your view, such an activity would be a problematic international data transfer. And I wonder if you could elaborate on that critique regarding facial recognition.
There are so many things wrong with facial recognition and with every kind of biometrical recognition in the public space. That's the difference. For example, you have a movie from a crime scene, and you try to identify that people from a database of criminals known. That's a different thing to that kind of every person embracing facial recognition or biometrical recognition in the public scene. First, you're changing the attitude of citizens and government if you really have to accept that someone is interpreting your behavior in a way you don't know in advance. So that limits your using your citizen rights. Second one is the problematic false positives in the algorithms, higher in the minorities, and really presenting them for repressional powers of police and secret services at that point. And the third one is the transfer of such biometric data, not only facial recognition. I could do the same with genome sequence analyzing and Chinese companies outside the European law system, not just physically to United States, but outside the pure level of European law. So for example, American companies in Germany under the Cloud Act. And then there is the risk that these biometrical data are taken away by third country security forces, by companies in other countries where the purpose limitation of data isn't the same like in Europe. And this is a too high risk because you can't change your face. You can't change the way you walk. You can't change the way you speak or sound. And we see that the misuse of that data is a unbearable risk for the citizens. So yes, the fight against this use of biometric recognition in the public space is one of the most important in our work.
Well, we'll end on that note, looking towards a future, a technology that seemed futuristic at one point, but is here now and being used. So Professor Kelber, thank you so much for joining us at this year's Privacy and Security Forum Spring. It was great to talk to you, and thank you for all your insights.
So, thank you, and stay negative.
Yes, we'll all try. Be well, be safe.
Goodbye.